So as you all know, actually, ecosystem, as we all know that ecosystem actually is nothing but it is a part of nature. So it is actually, a part of nature where the both the what do you say, the biotic component as well as the non-biotic component, they interact among themselves. So that is what we call it as nothing but ecosystem. So you all know living organisms, they cannot live without the non-living environment. So always living organisms actually cannot live isolated from their non-living environment, because the non-living environment provides them the materials as well as energy for their survival. So that is why actually there should always be a coordination, or you can say a relationship between the non-living environment with that of the living environment. Then only the ecosystems, or you can say, can be sustained. The term ecosystem actually is being coined by a scientist called as A.G. Tansley. He was actually an English botanist in the year 1935. So he has actually coined the term called as ecosystem, where he has defined ecosystem as the structural and the functional unit of ecology. And also he said that this ecosystem actually is nothing but a relationship between the biotic as well as a abiotic component. For example, if you can take an example of a lake, you can take an example of a pond, desert, or grassland, or the meadow. So these are actually nothing but they are called as the ecosystems, where in any ecosystem, if you take whether it is a pond ecosystem or a lake ecosystem or a desert ecosystem, there is always a relationship between the biotic component with that of an abiotic component. So here biotic component means living organisms, whereas abiotic component means they are the non-living organisms. Now we'll see what is the structure and the function of an ecosystem, what actually the ecosystem consists of. Now basically if you see, each ecosystem consists of two components. What are those? One is called as the abiotic component and the other one is called as a biotic component. Abiotic component actually are the non-living components, whereas biotic components are the living components or the living organisms like plants, animals, microorganisms, human beings, and all those things. Now, first we will talk or discuss about the abiotic component. So just now I've told you that ecosystem consists of two components. One is called as abiotic component and the other one is called as a biotic component. Now, abiotic components actually are the climatic as well as edaphic factors. I mean, they have been classified into two. One is called as a climatic factor or climatic component, and the other one is called as the edaphic component. Now, climatic actually with reference to the climate, like you have rainfall, light, wind, and the temperature. Whereas edaphic factors actually are soil, pH, minerals, as well as the topography of the soil. So all these actually are the abiotic components of any ecosystem. Now, if we talk about the biotic components, now the biotic components actually are the living organisms. Now, these biotic components are classified into three types. What are those? They are called as the producers, consumers, as well as the decomposers. Producers are also called as the autotrophs. Then you have consumers or the heterotrophs and decomposers or the saprotrophs. Now, these consumers again, actually, now the producers, if you see, the producers are those organisms which can manufacture their own food. They can synthesize their own food. Like, for example, plants. They do not depend on others. They prepare the food. Whereas the consumers as well as the decomposers, they actually depend on the producers. So, but whereas consumers actually, they cannot prepare their own food or they cannot synthesize their own food. They depend totally on the producers. Now, these consumers actually are classified into four different types. They are called as primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, as well as the quaternary consumers. Now, primary consumers actually basically are herbivores. Secondary consumers are also called as primary carnivores. And tertiary consumers are the large carnivores, whereas quaternary consumers actually are the omnivores. Now, the last one are the saprotrophs. They are nothing but your microorganisms which actually decompose the dead organic matter and try to convert them or recycle them into the nutrients. So that is how actually the ecosystem will function. Now, the ecosystem actually basically any ecosystem if you take, it consists of two components. One is called as the abiotic component and the other one is called as the biotic component. So as you all know, ecosystem actually is what? It is nothing but a part of nature where both the biotic as well as the non-biotic component actually they interact among themselves as well as with the physical environment. Now, the term ecosystem actually was first given by the scientist called as A.G. Tansley. So he has given this particular term, that is ecosystem, and he called ecosystem, he defined ecosystem as nothing but a structural as a functional unit of an ecology, where the biotic as well as the abiotic component actually will interact. Now, just now we have seen what are the two components. So abiotic as well as the biotic component. Abiotic actually are the non-living components, or you can say the non-living components. So they are actually are of two types, the abiotic as well as biotic. Abiotic actually with reference to climate and edaphic. Now in the climate you have rain, light, wind as well as temperature, whereas the edaphic factors deal with the soil, pH, minerals and the topography. Now coming to the biotic component, they have been classified into producers, consumers as well as the decomposers. Now consumers are again classified into four types, that is primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer as well as a quaternary consumer. Now I'll see one by one what are the different components. Now coming to the climatic factors. Now the climatic factors actually include the rain, temperature, light, wind, humidity, etc. Whereas edaphic factors include the soil, pH, topography, minerals, and all those things. Now, coming to the soils. Now, the soils actually are very, very complex, and they contain a mixture of what do you say, the soil particles, rock fragments, highly altered soil mineral particles, organic matter, and they provide the nutrients, water, as well as home for the and a medium for the vegetation. The atmosphere provide the organisms within this system. So and with the process of, they undergo actually different processes, like the process of evaporation, transpiration, precipitation cycle between the water as well as the atmosphere. So the soils actually are much complex, we can say, than the simple sediments. They include what? They contain a mixture of wealthy rocks, fragments, highly altered soil mineral particles, organic matter, as well as the living organisms. That we can say that they provide nutrients, they provide water, they provide a home, as well as a structural growing medium for the various organisms. Now, next is your pH. Now, coming to the pH, you all know actually pH is nothing but the negative logarithm of the hydrogen ion concentration, whether the soil or the water body. On the soil, you have got this water. So the water actually, most of the living organisms, they live in water. So most living tissues actually, they composed of a high percentage of water. So water actually is also a medium by which the mineral nutrients can enter and get translocated through the leaves as well as the the plants as well as the animals. So these plants and animals, they take their water, they receive their water from the earth surface, and this is how actually, and also from the soil. So the original source of this water is nothing but precipitation from the atmosphere. So this is about the soil. Now, coming to the topography and minerals, we can say that soil as well as the water, they consist of the number of minerals. And these minerals actually are present in the atmosphere, and these minerals are being produced, okay, by various phenomena or by various processes in the atmosphere. Now, coming to the biotic component. Now, the biotic component actually will include the plants, animals, as well as the different, the organisms, like microorganisms and also the human beings. Now, the living organisms actually include the plants, animals, as well as the microorganisms. Microorganisms actually include bacteria, fungi, and all those things. Now, these have been classified into three different types. Already I have told you, that is the producers, consumers, as well as the decomposers. Now coming to the producers, now the producers actually are nothing but they are the plants. You all know actually the plants are green in color, and the green color that is present in the plants is nothing but because of the chlorophyll, and because they contain the chlorophyll content, actually they can undergo the photosynthesis. So with the help of this photosynthesis phenomena, they try to prepare the food. So as the green plants, actually they can manufacture their own food. So that is why they are called as the autotrophs. They are called as the autotrophs. Auto means self, and trophos meaning actually nothing but the feeder. So that means they can prepare their own food. Now, the chemical energy stored by these producers actually is utilized by the producers for their own growth and also for their survival. The next is what? Consumers. Now, consumers actually are nothing but the animals. Now, when you talk about the animals, animals do not contain the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll is present only in the plants, whereas animals lack the chlorophyll. So since they lack the chlorophyll, they cannot synthesize their own food. They depend upon the producers for their food. So hence they are called as nothing but the heterotrophs. Hetero means other, whereas trophos means feeder, means they depend upon the others for their feeding. So this is about the consumers. Now, coming to the consumers, we all know actually the consumers are of four types. They are primary consumers or secondary consumers, as tertiary consumers, as well as quaternary consumers. Now, the consumers, primary consumers are also called as first order consumers or the herbivores. Now, herbivores are nothing but they are the animals which feed only on the plants. They feed only on the plants, or we can say they are or the producers. So they feed only on the plants or the producers. Producers are what here? They are nothing but the plants. For example, rabbit, deer, goat, and cattle. So they do not take up, they are not carnivores. They don't take up the meat, flesh, and all those things. They feed only on the plants, and hence they are called as the herbivores. Now, secondary consumers are called as the second order consumers, or you can also call them as primary carnivores. Now, these animals actually feed on the herbivores, and they are called primary consumers like cats, foxes, as well as the snakes. So the animals which feed on the herbivores, they are called as what? They are called as the primary the consumers, like cats, foxes, snakes, and all those things. Then you have got the tertiary consumers, which is also called as the third order consumers. Now, these are actually the large carnivores, and they feed on the secondary consumers. And lastly, you have quaternary consumers or the fourth order consumers. These are the largest carnivores which feed on the tertiary consumers. So examples you can give as the lions as well as the tigers. Now, for tertiary consumers, examples are the wolves. So these are the different types of the consumers. So we all know actually the biotic component actually are divided into three different types. They are the producers, they are the consumers, and they are the decomposers. Now, coming to the producers, you all know producers are nothing but the plants. Since the plants contain the chlorophyll pigment, they can synthesize their own food with the help of the photosynthesis mechanism. The next is what? Next is the consumers. Now, the consumers fall into four different categories. They are primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, and quaternary. Primary consumer actually are the consumers which feed only on the plants or the producers. Examples, rabbit, deer, goat, as well as the cattle. Secondary consumers actually feed on the herbivores, and hence they are called secondary. Example, you can give as cats, foxes, as well as the snakes. And the tertiary consumer actually are the large carnivores which feed on the secondary consumer. Example for this is wolves. Whereas the last one, that is a quaternary consumer or the fourth order consumer, are the largest one, and they feed on the tertiary consumers. Examples are the lions as well as the tigers. And the last category, that is a biotic component, is nothing but the decomposers. They are also called as the reducers. Now, the bacteria as well as the fungi belong to this particular category. What is their role is, these break down the dead organic matter, okay, of the plants as well as the animals, that is the consumers, for their food, and then release to the nutrient. So what do? Whatever the complex organic substances that are present, they try to break down and they try to convert them into simple inorganic and organic substances, which has been produced as a byproducts. So these simple substances again are reused by the producers, and the producers, resulting in a cycling of the materials between the biotic as well as the abiotic component or the abiotic environment. Hence, they are also called as the saprotrophs. Sapros meaning rotten, whereas trophos meaning feeder. So what is the role of the decomposers? Decomposers are nothing but they are the bacteria as well as the fungi. They break down the complex organic food material actually. That is the producers. So they break down the dead organic matter of the plants, that is the producers as well as the consumers, for their food. And what do? They release, you can say, or they convert that organic food substances into simple inorganic as well as organic substances produced as a byproducts of their metabolism. And these simple substances again, they are being reutilized or reused by the producers, resulting in the cyclic exchange of the minerals or the materials between the biotic community as well as the abiotic environment. And hence the decomposers are also called as saprotrophs, or also they are also called as the reducers. Okay, so this is how, see, the relationship within an ecosystem. If you take now you need. So these are actually all these. Sun is a main ultimate source of energy. Okay, and the plants take up this sun, the energy that is being radiated from the sun. They undergo the photosynthesis and they produce what? They produce the food. So when once they produce the food, this is taken up by means of by the herbivores, that is a carnivores. Okay, they are being consumed, and then these herbivores, I mean the carnivores as well as they take in and they consume it. Okay. So likewise, again, what happens is the herbivores and consumers, whatever the decomposers are there, these decomposers, what do they try to do? They try to break down the complex organic substances with help of decomposition phenomena. They try to decompose it and into the simpler organic forms, and these simple what do you say, the organic as well as the inorganic substances, they are produced as a byproduct, we can say, and they are again being reused by the producers, resulting in a cyclic what do you say, the cyclic exchange of the minerals, can say, between the biotic as well as the abiotic environment. So that is how actually there is a relationship between the biotic community with that of an abiotic component. So always actually, if the nature has to be in a balanced, then the biotic as well as the abiotic component should live in a what do you say, harmony or a balanced. They should be balanced, then only the ecosystem actually will be a healthy ecosystem. So this is about the different types of consumers, we can say, different type, the herbivores, producers as well as the decomposers. So these are the different, you can say, components of a biotic community. So abiotic community, we have seen they fall into two different categories. One is edaphic as well as other one is climate. If you talk about the climate is pH, temperature, wind, and all those things. When you talk about the edaphic, it is with reference to soil, water, pH, and all those things. Now, coming to biotic component, they are classified into three, that is herbivores, carnivores, and then the decomposers. Now, we have seen what is their important role. So, each one actually plays a very, very significant role in the, what do you say, the balancing of the ecosystem. Okay. The next is, now, what are the functions of the ecosystem? How this ecosystem will function? Now, functioning of ecosystem is also very, very important. Actually, you all know these ecosystems are complex dynamic systems. So they perform certain functions. Now we'll see one by one what are the different functions that are being performed by an ecosystem. So you all know what is an ecosystem? Ecosystem is nothing but actually it is confined to any population, you can say, or the interrelationship, okay, between the different communities or between the population, okay, with a non-living environment. Or you can say that the interrelationship between the biotic as well as the non-biotic component is nothing but called as an ecosystem. Now we have seen what are the different components of an ecosystem. Now we will see what are the different functions of an ecosystem one by one. Now actually the functions of an ecosystem fall into different categories, like they play a role in productivity, decomposition, energy flow, biological food chains, that is in the form of biological, you can say, the role that is in the form of food chain, food web, as well as ecological succession, and the biological biochemical processes, you can say, or biogeochemical processes, like the different cycles, nutrient cycle, like you have water cycle, carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, and all those things. So they play a very, very significant role. So the ecosystems actually are very, very complex. So we each the ecosystem, actually any ecosystem if you take, whether it is a terrestrial ecosystem or whether it is an aquatic ecosystem, they perform these functions. Now we'll see one by one what are the different functions actually the ecosystem will perform. Now first one is called as a productivity. Now what do you mean by productivity? Now productivity, actually, see, you all know in the an ecosystem there are different biotic components, that is your producers, then you have got the consumers, and then you have got the decomposers. Now with reference to the producers, actually you all know how do you think that the plants produce the the food for the animals as well as for the human beings. So for this they require the energy. So a constant input of solar energy actually is the basic requirement. So actually they receive the they take in the radiant energy that is from the sunlight. So solar energy is very, very essential. So a constant input of the solar energy actually is a basic requirement for any ecosystem to function and also to sustain. So this productivity actually fall into two categories. That is called as a primary productivity and secondary productivity. Now we'll see one by one. First, what do you mean by primary production? Primary production actually is nothing but the amount of biomass. You can say the amount of biomass or the organic matter which is produced per unit area over a period of time by the plants during photosynthesis. So you all know actually the plants are a basic component of any ecosystem. So they actually take in the sun's rays, that is the radiant energy actually, or you can say the energy that is being radiated from the sun. So, and they apply the photosynthesis phenomena, and with the help of the photosynthesis phenomena in the presence of the sunlight, they try to manufacture the food. So that is what we can say, that actually a continuous supply of the solar energy should be there. It is a basic requirement for any ecosystem to survive as well as to sustain. So because without sunlight, the plants cannot synthesize their food. So sunlight actually plays a very, very important role. Now, how does actually they try to produce? Now, primary production actually is referred to as the amount of biomass, you can say, or the organic matter which is being produced by the plants over a per unit area over a period of time during the photosynthesis. So we can say it is actually expressed in terms of weight or the energy. Now, the rate of biomass production is called as a productivity. So what do you mean by productivity? The rate of biomass production is nothing but called as a productivity. And this biomass actually is being produced by what? It is being produced by the plants with the help of the photosynthetic mechanism. So for the productivity, or you can say for the production of the biomass, energy is important. It is very, very essential. The solar energy actually is a basic requirement. So without the solar energy, then the plants cannot synthesize the food. They cannot undergo photosynthesis, you can say. There will not be any biomass or the organic matter. So what do the plants do? The plants actually try to what do you say, the synthesize, you can say, the food, okay, with the help of the solar energy, and undergo the process of photosynthesis. So here we can say productivity is nothing but the rate of biomass that is being produced is called as the productivity. So the rate of biomass production is called as nothing but the productivity, and this productivity actually is expressed in grams, or it is, that is in grams, or you can say it is in kilocalories. So it can be divided into two types. What are those? One is called as a gross primary productivity, and the other one is called as a net primary productivity. Gross primary productivity is GPP, whereas net primary productivity is NPP. So we all know what is productivity. Productivity is nothing but it is the amount of biomass or the organic matter that is being produced per unit area over a period of time by the plants during the mechanism of photosynthesis. And this, what do you say, the productivity can be expressed in terms of the grams, or it can be expressed in terms of kilocalories. It is broadly divided into two. One is called as the gross primary productivity, and the other one you call it as net primary productivity, and it has been denoted as GPP and NPP. Now we will see what do we mean by gross primary productivity. Now, gross primary productivity of any ecosystem is nothing but it is a rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. It is a rate of the production of the organic matter during photosynthesis. So what we are saying, what do you mean by productivity? It is nothing but the amount of the what do you say, the organic matter or the amount of biomass that is being produced during the photosynthetic mechanism. So here the gross primary productivity is nothing but the rate of the organic mass, or the rate of the production of the organic mass, or the rate of production of the organic matter during photosynthesis. You are calling it as nothing but gross primary productivity. Gross primary productivity, actually considerable amount of GPP actually is utilized by the plants in respiration. So gross primary productivity minus respiration will also, whatever the energy that is the organic matter actually that is being produced during this photosynthesis, photosynthesis actually is being utilized. It is being utilized for the purpose of the respiration. So the gross primary productivity minus respiration losses actually will give you the net primary productivity, we can say. So now the net primary productivity actually is nothing but the available biomass for the consumption to heterotrophs. So whatever after respiration, whatever it has been consumed, because during respiration, some amount of biomass, you can say, is being consumed. So the gross primary productivity minus the respiration loss actually will result in net primary productivity. So why do they require this NPP? Is nothing but actually it is available. So when once during the process of respiration, the energy is being lost. Whatever the remaining productivity is there, that is called as nothing but the net primary productivity. So this net primary productivity, in generally we can say it is nothing but the available biomass which is required for the consumption to the heterotrophs. So what are heterotrophs? Nothing but they are the herbivores as well as the consumers. Now, secondary productivity actually is what it is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by the consumers. Secondary productivity actually is the rate of formation of new organic matter by the consumers. Now, in case of primary productivity, it is only the role of the producers. Okay, that is autotrophs and a little bit autotrophs, mainly autotrophs. But when you talk about the secondary productivity, actually here you have the consumers will be there in the secondary productivity. So the rate of formation of so in the consumers, what do? They try to actually produce whatever the new organic matter that we actually call as nothing but the secondary productivity. So here primary productivity and secondary productivity are very, very important. So productivity, nothing but it is the rate of biomass that is being produced during the photosynthetic mechanism. It is divided into two. One is called gross primary productivity and the other we call as net primary productivity. Gross primary productivity actually is the rate of production of the organic matter during photosynthesis. Whereas net primary productivity is the available biomass, means whatever the the biomass that is available during that particular period for the consumption to heterotrophs, you call it as net primary productivity. Now coming to secondary productivity, it is nothing but the rate of formation of a new organic matter by the consumers. Now here, hello.
Yes, madam. Please set your name as display name, please.
Oh, okay, sir. Okay, sir.
మేడం నాకు చెప్పండి, నేను చేంజ్ చేస్తాను మేడం. మీ నేమ్ చెప్పండి ఒకసారి.
ఓకే ఓకే, నేను చాట్ చేస్తున్నాను సార్.
అవునా, నాకు చెప్పండి, నేను చేంజ్ చేస్తాను, పర్వాలేదు.
పర్వాలేదు, పంపించేసాను.
సరే మేడం, ఓకే, థ్యాంక్ యూ.
ఓకే. Okay. Okay, students. So that is about the primary productivity. Now coming to the secondary productivity. So secondary productivity actually is nothing but it is a rate of formation of new organic matter by the consumers. Now primary productivity basically depends. PRO maybe lunch papers ఇవ్వలేదా? నేను చేసి చెప్తాను. ఆయన చెప్పేసి క్లాస్ వస్తుంది. Okay, sorry for disturbance. Now coming to the secondary productivity. Now secondary productivity actually is nothing but the rate of formation of the new organic matter by the consumers. Now primary productivity basically depends on the plant species. Okay, it also depends on various factors, environmental factors like availability of nutrients as well as the photosynthetic capacity of the plants. Now, therefore, it varies in different types of ecosystems. So the annual net primary productivity of the whole biosphere actually is about 170 billion tons of the organic matter. Okay, so this is all about the productivity. So what is productivity? We have seen now productivity is nothing but it is defined as the rate of biomass production by the plants during the photosynthetic mechanism. So basically these productivity are of two types. One is called as the primary productivity and the other one is called as the secondary productivity. Now we have seen what is primary productivity. Now for this productivity, solar energy is very, very essential because it is a basic requirement. Without the solar energy, actually the ecosystem will not function at all. Even the plants actually, they require the sun's radiations to undergo the photosynthetic mechanism. So without the sunlight, the photosynthetic mechanism will not take place. So when once there is no photosynthesis means the plants cannot produce their own food. So that is why for the productivity to take place, the constant input of solar energy should be there. Now, the productivity is nothing but rate of biomass production. They are divided in two types, that is primary and secondary. Now, coming to the primary production, already we have seen there are two types, gross primary productivity as well as the net primary productivity. So what is gross and what is net, we have seen. Then next is we have got the secondary productivity. Secondary productivity deals with the rate of formation of the new organic matter by the consumers. Okay. Now, next is what? Decomposition. Now, what do you mean by decomposition? Or decomposition, if you talk about decomposition, actually it occurs by various methods, and this decomposition is this process of decomposition, you can say, actually is being carried over by the various microorganisms. Now, also here, not only the various microorganisms, but at the same time, even the earthworms, they also try to actually, though they are being farmers' friend, they also help in the breakdown of the complex organic matter. So these recomposers, what do they do? Their essential role is they try to break down the complex organic matter into simple inorganic forms. Inorganic substances like in the form of water, carbon dioxide, nutrients, and such a process actually you call it as nothing but decomposition. Now here, like you have said, dead plant remains will be there, like in the form of leaves, in the form of bark, flowers, and dead remains of the animals. So they include the fecal matter also. Say they constitute the detritus. So all this together, the raw material, actually when once this raw material is prepared for decomposition, then this dead organic matter, what do they try to do? They try to break down this complex organic form into the inorganic form, simple inorganic forms. So the main role, I mean the decomposers, what is the main role of decomposers? To decompose the organic matter. So there are different types of the processes of decomposition. They include fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humification, as well as the mineralization. So these are the different the processes of the decomposition. Decomposition and how this process will take place. These actually the decomposition mechanism takes place with the help of the detritivores. Now, what are detritivores? Detritivores are nothing but the dead organic matter. You can say detritivores are nothing but they are also called as decomposers. Like you have the different microorganisms like bacteria, fungi. Apart from that, even the earthworms also try to decompose the dead organic matter into the simple organic forms. So we will see one by one what are the different the processes of decomposition and how these different processes of decomposition actually are taking place. Now, detritivores, just now I told you example earthworm, they break down the detritus into smaller particles. This process you call it as the fragmentation. So different types of decomposition are there, that is fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humification, as well as mineralization. So one by one, if you see, first one is the fragmentation. Now, what do you mean by fragmentation? Fragmentation here in this, the earthworm plays a very significant role. They try to break down the detritus into small particles. This process you call it as fragmentation. What do you mean by detritus? Detritus is nothing but the dead and the decayed, or you can say the damaged remains of the plants. as well as the fecal matter of the animals constitute nothing but the detritus. Now, detritus is it is actually the dead or the decayed, you can say, the plants, in the form of, it may be dead leaves, bark of the stems, barks, flowers, as well as the dead remains of the animals, as well as the fecal matter. So all put together, it constitutes nothing but the detritus. So the decomposition of this detritus, you can say, actually will convert into the simple inorganic forms. And the work of this decomposition actually is being done by means of decomposers. And there are different processes of this decomposition. They are the fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humification, as well as mineralization. Now, the first one is fragmentation. Now, here the earthworms play a very, very significant role. So they try to break down these detritus into smaller particles. So this phenomena, we call it as nothing but the fragmentation. Now, next is what? Leaching. Now, in case of leaching, what happens is the water-soluble inorganic nutrients, they go down into the soil horizon and get precipitated as unavailable salts. So that is what we call it as leaching. Now, means water soluble, the inorganic nutrients. So whatever the inorganic nutrients actually that have been converted by the process of the leaching, what do they try to do? They try to actually seep. They try to go down into the soil, and then they try to get precipitated as unavailable salt. So that is actually called as leaching. Next is what? Catabolism. Now, the phenomena of decomposition, this is another process of decomposition. Here, the bacteria and the fungi play a very significant role. Now, bacteria and the fungi, they produce enzymes. They have got a number of enzymes. So these enzymes, they try to degrade the detritus into simple inorganic substances. So this is called as nothing but the catabolism. Catabolism. Then the other process of decomposition are humification as well as the mineralization. Now, humification and mineralization also occurs during the decomposition in the soil. Humification actually leads to accumulation of a dark colored amorphous substance called as the humus, that is highly resistant to the microbial action, and it undergoes decomposition. So what do you mean by humification? Now, humification is nothing but accumulation of a dark colored amorphous substance. So during the process of decomposition, what happens is whatever the inorganic substances are there, okay, they are formed, they get accumulated in the form of a dark colored amorphous substance, which is called as the humus. So such a process you call it as, and this actually takes place with the help of the the microbial action. The dark colored compound, amorphous substance, or you can say the compound that is being formed during this process, you call it as the humus. Now, this humus is further degraded by several other microbes, and they release a number of inorganic nutrients by a process called as mineralization. So these are the different processes of decomposition whereby the detritus, or you can say the decomposed organic matter that is being formed of the decayed plants, as well as the dead organisms which are being there, and also the fecal matter of these animals, they constitute the detritus. So the decomposition of this detritus actually will form it undergoes and actually it will form break down into the simple inorganic substances, we can say. So this decomposition process, or the decomposition phenomena, actually is an energy requiring process. So it requires oxygen. Without the oxygen, actually it will not take place, as you all know. So for everything from the production of the food till the decomposition phenomena, actually the solar energy or the sun's rays, you can say, or the sunlight is very, very essential. It is actually without the energy, without the source of the sunlight, actually the ecosystem cannot work properly. So as I have already told you in the initial stages, that the abiotic component, which are divided into two factors, like the climatic factors as well as the edaphic factors. So under climatic factors, you have what you have got the sunlight is there, water is there, wind, and all those things. Whereas under edaphic factors, you have soil, pH, water, and all those things. So both actually should live in a harmony. So without the edaphic factors and without the both climatic as well as edaphic factors actually are essential. They are required for each and every process, for each and every function of an ecosystem, we can say. Okay, so that is why decomposition also is based on it is an energy, or you can say an oxygen requiring process. So the rate of decomposition actually is being controlled, you can say, by the chemical composition of the detritus as well as the climatic factors. So this is all about, you can say, the decomposition. Now, the first one was productivity, the different functions. We are actually discussing the different functions of an ecosystem. The first function actually is the productivity. Now, we have seen how the formation of the organic, the biomass, you can say, or the organic matter has taken place. What is productivity? What are the different types of productivity? Second is what? The decomposition. Decomposition phenomena is nothing but where the dead organic matter, or you can say the detritus, is being decomposed. That is organic complex, the substances, organic complex substances are being converted into the simple inorganic forms by the help of the decomposers. We are involving different processes. Okay, so we have seen one by one the different processes, like we have seen the fragmentation, mineralization, bleaching, humification, and all those things. Now, the third function of an ecosystem actually is the energy flow. Now, what do you mean by energy flow? So the chemical energy of the food is the main source of energy, which is being required by all the living organisms. And this energy actually is being transmitted to different trophic levels along the food chain. Now, this energy actually flow is based on two different laws of thermodynamics. So whatever the energy flow, I mean the chemical energy of the food that we take in is very, very essential. Actually, it is the main source of energy. This energy actually has to be transmitted between the different organisms. Now, here the trophic levels actually correspond to each and every organism. If you talk about a food chain, like say, for example, in a food chain, you have got the producers are there, consumers are there, and the decomposers are there. So producers actually are being eaten by what? They are being eaten by consumers, and the consumers actually means primary consumers, secondary, tertiary consumers. They are in turn actually being decomposed. So like this, the cycle will go on. So the energy actually that is being transmitted to different levels, trophic levels. Each organism actually in a food chain is considered as a single trophic level. So the energy has to be transmitted to different trophic levels along the food chain. So it is based upon two laws of thermodynamics. What are those? We'll see now. That is, the first law of thermodynamics states that the energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only change from one form to another. This is what the first law of thermodynamics states. So it cannot be destroyed, or it cannot be created. Then the second law of thermodynamics states that the energy is transferred more and more of it if it is wasted. So it states that as the energy is transferred more and more of it is wasted. So that is how actually the first law and third. So the energy flow in an ecosystem actually is based upon in two laws of thermodynamics. That is the first law of thermodynamics and second law of thermodynamics. According to the first law of thermodynamics, the energy can neither be created nor it can be destroyed, but it can only change from one form to another. According to the second law, the more the energy you transfer, the more it is being wasted. So the energy flow in an ecosystem actually is one of the important factor that supports the survival of a great number of the organisms. So for almost all the organisms on the earth, the primary source is nothing but your solar energy that we get from the sunlight. Okay, so most of the sun's radiation actually that fall on the earth is usually reflected and this radiation we call it as nothing but the photosynthetically active radiation. Okay, so this is about the energy flow. Now we will see how actually this food chain as well as the food web will take place. So the energy flow actually will take place via the food chain as well as the food web. Now, during the food process of this energy flow, what happens is the plants actually being the producers, they absorb the sunlight with the help of the chloroplast, and then a part of it actually is transformed into chemical energy in the process of photosynthesis. Then this energy actually is being stored in various organic products in the plants, and they are passed on to the primary producers in the food chain. When the herbivores consume, that is a primary consumers. Then the plants as food, and then convert the chemical energy accumulated in the plant products into the kinetic energy, degradation of energy. So like this, then this is being followed by the secondary consumers. Again, secondary consumers will take up this energy and again it will get converted. Then this will be followed by tertiary consumers, consumers, like that actually the energy will flow. And always the energy in an ecosystem or via the food chain and via the food web, actually it passes in a unidirectional manner. That always energy flow is unidirectional. That means it will pass only in one direction. It will pass only in the one direction. So that is how the energy flow will take place. So the energy is very, very essential. Now, the energy flow in a food chain, actually, we can say the energy flows via the food chain, via the food web in any ecosystem. So here, what the every what do you say? The organism actually has a crucial role to play. First, the producers, what do? The plant, they try to absorb the sunlight, okay, and then they try with the help of the sunlight. A part of the sunlight they try to actually help in synthesizing the food, and a part of it actually it will transform into the chemical energy with the process of photosynthesis. Then this energy later on it will be stored in various organic products, okay, and then it will be passed on to the primary the consumers. Means when the herbivores they try to consume these plants, a part of it actually will be transmitted again, and then this energy will be transmitted from the primary consumers to the secondary consumers, from the secondary consumers to the tertiary consumers. So like this, the cycle, or you can say the energy flow will be passed on. It will be transmitted from one trophic level to another trophic level. So based on the source of their nutrition or food, you can say the organism, they occupy a specific place in the food chain. So that is what called, just now I have told you, the trophic level means in a food chain. In a food chain, if you say a food chain or a food web, okay, every organism actually has given a certain position, and that position in a food chain, that position, or you can say the organisms actually occupy a specific place or occupy a specific place in an ecosystem or in a chain. So that specific place, you can call it as nothing but a trophic level. You call it as a trophic level. So we can say the producers actually belong to the first trophic level, whereas secondary consumers actually they belong to the second trophic level, as a trophic level, then followed by followed by the third trophic level, then the fourth trophic level. So like mean depending upon, so every organism in a food chain we can say occupies a specific position, occupies a specific place. So first are the producers. Since the producers are the first one, they are being consumed by the consumers. So the producers occupy the first trophic level, followed by the primary consumers, second trophic level, followed by the you have got the secondary consumers, that is the third trophic level, followed by the tertiary consumers, then followed by the quaternary consumers. So like this, the trophic level actually has been allotted to each and every organism in a food chain or in any ecosystem. Like say for example, here see, now this is a diagrammatic representation of, see, primary producers actually they occupy the first trophic level. Now, second trophic level is being occupied by the primary consumers, which are nothing but the herbivores. Secondary consumers occupy the third trophic level. Tertiary consumers occupy the fourth trophic level. They are the top carnivores. Like, for example, first trophic level means they are all plants. Like you can give the examples as phytoplanktons, grass, as well as the trees. Second trophic level actually is being occupied by the herbivores. So here you have zooplanktons, grasshoppers, and the cow. They are totally herbivorous. They feed only on the plants. Then you have third trophic level, which are basically carnivores. They include the birds, fishes, as well as the bull. And top carnivores, that is the fourth trophic level, is being occupied by the top carnivore, where we can see here they are omnivorous also, like man, lion, and all those things. Means even man, if you take an example, they consume both the herbivores as well as both plants as well as animals. So that is why you can also call them as the omnivores. So this is how actually in a food chain or in a food web, actually these are the different trophic levels, and each trophic level actually is being occupied by the plants as well as the animals, including the humans. Okay, so this is about the energy flow. So the transfer of food energy, or the transfer of the energy in the form of a food from the producers through a series of organisms, that is herbivores to that of the carnivores to decomposers, with repeated eating and being eaten, you call it as nothing but a food chain. So what is a food chain? Food chain is nothing but a transfer of the food energy. How the energy is being transferred, or how the food energy is being transferred. First, actually, the producers will be there. Then you have got the consumers will be there. Then you have got the decomposers. So with repeated eating as well as being eaten. So you all know actually the producers actually they are the main what do you say, the plants which synthesize their food. So these the plants are being eaten by what? They are being eaten by the what do you say, the primary consumers. Primary consumers are being eaten by secondary consumers. Secondary consumers are being eaten by the tertiary consumers. So when once that is over, then lastly the decomposed or the dead organic matter, whatever is remaining, when once they are dead, that is actually being decomposed. So likewise, what happens? The cycle will go on. So the transfer of this food energy from the producers, okay, through the series of what do you say, the organisms, like in the form of primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, to the decomposers, actually with repeated eating and also being eaten, is called as nothing but a food chain. So in nature, actually, you have two types of food chain. They are called as a grazing food chain, and they are the detritus food chain. Now we'll see what are grazing food chain and what do you mean by the detritus food chain. So food chains and the energy flow, they are actually the functional properties of any ecosystem. They are the functional properties of any ecosystem. So the biotic as well as the abiotic components are, we can say, are linked to through them. They are linked to them. So that is why I have already mentioned to you that actually in any ecosystem or in ecosystem, the biotic component as well as the abiotic component actually should be balanced. Okay, then only the ecosystem will be healthy. So both of them actually should work in a cordial manner, and both of them are very, very essential for any ecosystem actually to run, or for a balanced ecosystem, we can say the biotic as well as the abiotic components are very, very essential. Okay. Now coming to the types of food chain. Now what is the food chain? Already we have discussed. Now coming to different types of food chain. There are two types of food chain. One is called the grazing and the other one is called as the detritus food chain. Now grazing food chain, actually it will start from the green plants. As we have seen earlier now, where the green plants actually make up their food. For example, herbivores, in turn for the carnivores. So ecosystem with such type of food chain, they are directly actually dependent on an influx of solar irradiation. So this type of food chain thus depends on autotrophic energy, energy capture and the movement of captured energy to the herbivores. So a simple grazing food chain actually is depicted below, or it is given below. Like you have phytoplankton, zooplanktons, and the fish sequence, or you can say grasses, then rabbit for sequences are the examples, and the grazing food chain. Now, what do you mean by grazing food chain here? In a grazing food chain, actually, it starts with what? It starts with the green plant. That means it starts with the the herbivores, where the herbivores actually requires the energy requires energy, and it receives the energy from the solar radiation, that is from the sunlight. So any ecosystem, if you take, any chain, the food chain, if you take, and if it starts from the green plant, that is herbivores, then such food chain you call it as a grazing food chain. Now, for example, now phytoplanktons you have. Phytoplanktons are what? They are come under the plants. So these plants actually, phytoplanktons are being eaten by zooplanktons, we can say. And these zooplanktons actually are being eaten by what? Small fishes. And small fishes are being eaten by larger fishes. So all these together, they form one food chain. They form one food chain. But the what is the first trophic level? The first trophic level actually is nothing but it is being occupied by the what? The green plants, that is the herbivore. So such a type of food chain, you call it as the grazing food chain. Now another example they have given, like you have example for grasses. Suppose if you have a grassland ecosystem, say for example, and the grassland ecosystem will have only the grass. So this grass actually will be eaten by rabbit, and rabbit, because since it is a herbivore, it will eat only grass, and this rabbit actually will be eaten by fox, and this fox actually will be eaten by some other higher animal, like you can say lion, or what do you say, tiger, and all those things. So like this, what happens? Such a type of what do you say, the food chain, where actually the first trophic level, or you can say which starts from the green plants, or which starts from the herbivores, or which starts from the phytoplankton, we can say, actually are called as grazing food chain. Now coming to detritus food chain, it starts from the dead organic matter. Detritus food chain actually starts from the dead organic matter to the detrivore organisms, which in turn make food for the protozoans, for protozoans to carnivores. So the detritus food chain actually begins with the dead organic matter. It is made, dead organic matter means what? So it is made up of decomposers. That means it is made up of decomposers, which are heterotrophics, mainly fungi as well as the bacteria. So what do? They meet their energy as well as the nutrient requirement by degrading the dead organic matter. So here it is a totally reverse. In case of detritus food chain, here the first trophic level you can say, or you can say in the food chain first actually you have the detritivores, or you can say decomposers. So what are the decomposers? Decomposers are nothing but they are the bacteria as well as the fungi. So here the bacteria as well as the fungi, they are the heterotrophic organisms. So what do? They try to degrade the dead organic matter or the detritus. So they are also known as saprotrophs. Okay, because they decompose. So these decompose, what do? They secrete the digestive enzymes that break down this dead as well as the waste material into simple inorganic forms or into simple inorganic materials, which are subsequently absorbed by them. So that is how actually the detritus food chain. So in any ecosystem, in an aquatic ecosystem, for example, detritus food chain actually is the major conduit for energy flow. For example, as against this, in a terrestrial ecosystem, a much larger fraction of energy flows through the detritus food chain when compared to this. So detritus food chain actually may be connected with the grazing food chain at some trophic levels. Okay, so that is how. So detritus food chain is nothing but we can say it starts from the decomposers. It doesn't start from the the producers. It starts from the decomposers. See, in an ecosystem, the energy actually we are saying the energy will flow from one organism to another organism. That means the food energy in the form of a food chain. If you talk about, it starts from what? It starts from the herbivores to the decomposers. That means herbivores will be eaten by the carnivores. That means in the form of primary, secondary, and tertiary. And this later on actually it will be decomposed. So that is how actually the energy will be passed or the flow of energy will take place. This is what we call grazing. But in case of, with reference to the detritus, it starts with the decomposers. It starts with the decomposers, where the decomposers try to actually secrete the enzymes, and these enzymes help them in converting the dead organic matter or the decomposed matter into simple inorganic forms. Okay. Now, another type of food chain we have that is called parasitic food chain. Now, parasitic food chain actually is nothing but an auxiliary food chain where it begins with the host and usually ends in the parasite. Parasitic. So much is not talked about this parasitic food chain because it pertains only to the parasites actually which lives inside a host. So you all know actually the parasites will be active only when once they are inside a they try to actually harm only the host. So these parasitic food chain actually, when we talk about this parasitic food chain, the parasitic food chain actually begins with the host and also it will end with the parasite. So it will not go anywhere. So it does not require. So it is actually a relationship between the host to that of a parasite. Okay. Now we will see what is food web. Now coming to the food web, simple food chains are very, very rare in nature. Now when you talk about a food chain, like for example, just now we have seen the examples of a grazing food chain, or you can say a food chain in a pond ecosystem. They're very, very simple. Like say, for example, you have phytoplanktons being eaten by the larvae. You can say that is zooplankton being eaten by small fishes being eaten by the big fishes. So that is how we call such a type of food chain actually is very, very simple. So such simple food chains actually are very, very rare in nature because each organism actually may obtain the food from more than one trophic level. So thus in an ecosystem, the various food chains actually are interconnected to each other. So we can say when the interconnection of the various food chains between different organisms actually constitute nothing but a food web. Now we will see what is a food web. Okay, so now the interconnection between the different food chains. Okay, they form a network-like structure that we call it as nothing but a food web. So what is a food web? Food web actually includes all the possible transfers of energy and nutrients among the organisms in an ecosystem. Whereas food chain actually traces only one pathway. It has got only one pathway of food. But whereas a food web actually will try to communicate. It tries to form a link between the different food chains and actually try to entangle, you can say, try to form a network. That network you call it as nothing but a food web. So the food webs are actually very, very essential in maintaining the stability of an ecosystem. So now we will see what is the difference between a food chain and a food web if you talk. Now the food chain actually, we all know, it is a phenomenon of transfer of energy through a series of organisms falling on successive trophic levels. Whereas food web actually is an interconnection of the food chains which show relation between them. In food chains, only usually member of high trophic level actually will feed upon a single type of organism of lower trophic level. Whereas in case of food web, members of higher trophic level, they feed upon many organisms of lower trophic levels, because here many organisms will be there. So members of higher trophic level, they feed on many organisms of the lower trophic level. But here only one organism. In case of food chain, again, separate and isolated food chains will increase the instability in the ecosystem. Whereas in a food web, stability of the ecosystem actually will increase, or you can say in a food web, the ecosystem will be very, very stable. Why? Because stability of this ecosystem will be increased by the presence of complex food webs. And in case of food chain, removal of one group of the organism will disturb the whole chain in case of food chain. But in case of a food web, removal of one group of organism will not disturb, because there are a number of organisms will be there in a food web. They are all intercommunicated or interconnected with each other. Since many organisms are there, always it is stable, and there will not be any problem. So always actually the ecosystem with reference to food web actually is very, very stable. But with reference to food chain, it is unstable. Why? Because if any one of the organism actually is dead or being removed, then the ecosystem will get disturbed. So these are the differences between the the food chain as well as the food. Okay. So so students, so this is all about the ecosystem. So today we have discussed about what is ecosystem. We have defined ecosystem, and we have seen what are the different the components of an ecosystem, and also the functions of an ecosystem. So in the next class, we'll talk about the other parameters. Yes.